Every morning, before most people have had their first coffee, somewhere between 15 and 20 million barrels of oil are already moving. Not through pipelines, not through refineries, through water. Specifically, through a narrow corridor of water in the Middle East that most people could not find on a map without help. It is called the Strait of Hormuz, and I think it might be the single most important piece of geography on the planet right now. Not because of what it is, but because of how fragile it actually is. Here is the number that stopped me when I first came across it. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is just 21 miles wide. That is it. 21 miles of water separating the Persian Gulf from the open ocean. And through that corridor flows roughly 20% of the entire world's oil supply every single day. Saudi Arabia ships through it, Iraq ships through it, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, all of them depend on this single exit point to move their energy to the rest of the world. And just now that possibility stopped being theoretical. In March 2026, following military strikes on Iran, the strait was effectively closed for the first time in its recorded history. Tankers were attacked. Over 150 vessels anchored in open water rather than risk the crossing. Oil prices surged above $100 a barrel. The world discovered very quickly that it had no real backup plan, and that the warnings economists had been making for decades were not exaggerated at all. Which is exactly why, when I started digging into this topic, I kept coming back to one idea. One engineering proposal that refuses to die, no matter how many times economists and geologists explain why it is nearly impossible. A canal. Cut directly through the mountains of Oman, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz entirely. I want to walk you through this project properly. On the surface, it sounds almost too simple. Underneath the surface, which is exactly where the problems start, it becomes one of the most complicated infrastructure challenges ever seriously proposed. First, let's establish the geography properly. I think a lot of people misunderstand what they are actually looking at when they look at the Strait of Hormuz on a map. The Persian Gulf is essentially a long, enclosed body of water shaped roughly like a leaf. It stretches about 990 kilometers from northwest to southeast. On its northern shore sits Iran. On its southern shore, from west to east, you have Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and then Oman. At the far southeastern end of this leaf, the water narrows dramatically. That narrowing is the Strait of Hormuz. Pass through it and you exit into the Gulf of Oman, which connects to the Arabian Sea and ultimately to the open Indian Ocean. Now look at what sits right at that narrowing. On the Iranian side, the northern shore, the water is relatively open, but on the southern side, at the very tip of the Arabian Peninsula, there is a rugged, dramatic piece of territory that juts northward into the strait like a natural fortress. This is the Musandam Peninsula. It belongs to Oman, though it is geographically separated from the rest of Oman by the United Arab Emirates. It is an exclave, an isolated territory, and it is one of the most dramatic landscapes in the entire Middle East. The Musandam Peninsula is not desert. I want to be clear about that because the mental image most people have of this region is flat sand. Musandam is the opposite. It is the southern end of the Hajar mountain range. Limestone peaks rise sharply from the coastline. Fjord-like inlets called khors carve into the rock. Some peaks in this region climb above 2,000 meters. The local Shehu people have lived in these mountains for centuries, in stone houses perched on cliff sides that most people would not attempt to hike. And here is where the engineering idea emerges. Because in several places across this peninsula, the distance between the Persian Gulf side and the Gulf of Oman side is surprisingly short. We're talking distances of roughly 50 to 70 kilometers in some corridors. Which means, on paper, if you could dig a canal straight through this terrain, tankers could exit the Persian Gulf without ever passing through the Strait of Hormuz at all. That's the dream. Now let's talk about why the dream immediately runs into reality. The first and most fundamental problem is the terrain itself. A canal through Musandam would not be like digging through flat desert or soft sediment. Engineers would be cutting through solid limestone mountain ranges. The excavation volumes involved are genuinely staggering when you work through the numbers. Modern supertankers, specifically the class known as VLCC, which stands for Very Large Crude Carriers, are among the largest vessels ever built. A fully loaded VLCC can be around 330 meters long. It draws approximately 22 meters of water when full. That means a canal capable of handling this traffic would need a navigable depth of at least 25 meters, and likely more for safety margins. Width requirements for two-way traffic would push the canal to somewhere between 300 and 500 meters across at the water surface, accounting for sloped canal walls. Now apply those dimensions to mountainous terrain. You are not just digging down, you are cutting through mountains that rise hundreds of meters above sea level. The amount of rock that would need to be excavated, blasted, crushed, and removed is almost impossible to visualize intuitively. Engineering estimates for comparable projects in similar terrain suggest we could be talking about several billion cubic meters of material. The Panama Canal expansion, which was a significant widening and deepening of an existing canal through relatively manageable terrain, cost approximately $5.25 billion and took nearly a decade. A Musandam canal would be a categorically different undertaking. Cost projections I have seen referenced in academic and policy discussions range from $50 billion on the absolute low end to well over $200 billion when full infrastructure, security, and operational systems are included. The $100 billion figure used commonly in discussions is probably a reasonable midpoint estimate, and probably still optimistic. There is also the question of water levels. The Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman are at roughly similar sea levels, which eliminates the need for a lock system like Panama requires. That is actually one point in the project's favor. A sea level canal is simpler to operate than a lock-based system, but simpler to operate is a very different thing from simple to build. Then there is the political dimension. This is where I personally think the project faces its most underappreciated obstacle. The Musandam Peninsula belongs to Oman. Oman is not a country that has shown any serious public appetite for hosting a project of this nature. Oman's current development strategy for the Musandam region centers on ecotourism, fishing infrastructure, and smaller-scale port development. The region's dramatic fjord landscape has made it a growing destination for diving and adventure tourism. Carving a shipping canal through those fjords would permanently alter one of the most visually striking coastlines in the Arabian Gulf region. Beyond Oman's own calculations, a project like this would require a level of international financial commitment and political cooperation that has historically been very difficult to achieve in this region. Who funds it? Who controls it? What toll structure applies? Who provides security? These are not trivial questions. The Suez Canal is controlled by Egypt. The Panama Canal is controlled by Panama. A Musandam Canal, if it ever existed, would represent one of the most strategically significant pieces of infrastructure on Earth. Every major energy importing nation would have a stake in its security and governance. Negotiating that framework would likely take decades, even if the engineering was straightforward. And then there is the uncomfortable strategic truth that I think often gets glossed over in the more optimistic presentations of this idea. A canal does not eliminate vulnerability, it relocates it. Right now the choke point is 21 miles wide. A canal would be, at most, a few hundred meters wide. A single vessel deliberately grounded in the channel, a targeted infrastructure strike, a controlled demolition of a critical section of canal wall. Any of these scenarios could close the route faster and more completely than the strait has ever been closed. The world would simply exchange one fragile choke point for a narrower, more fragile one. So why does this idea keep reappearing? I've been thinking about this since I started researching this video, and I think the honest answer is this. The canal proposal is less about engineering and more about anxiety. When you look at what countries have actually done to reduce their dependence on the Strait of Hormuz, the results are telling. Saudi Arabia operates the East-West pipeline, which connects its eastern oil fields to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. Capacity is around 5 million barrels per day. The United Arab Emirates completed the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline in 2012, linking its Habshan fields to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, bypassing Hormuz entirely with a capacity of around 1.5 million barrels per day. These are real functioning alternatives, but combined, they represent a fraction of the 20 million barrels per day that flow through the strait. The gap between existing bypass capacity and actual traffic volume is enormous, and that gap is what keeps engineers and strategists returning to the Canal idea. The world has spent decades building a global energy system that runs through one narrow corridor. And despite knowing how exposed that makes everything, the economic and political will to fundamentally change that architecture has never quite materialized. I find that genuinely fascinating. Not in an abstract, academic way, but in the sense that it reveals something important about how infrastructure actually gets built, or how it does not. The projects that change the world do not always win on engineering merit. They win when the political moment aligns with the economic necessity and the technical capability all at once. The Suez Canal happened because 19th century European trade economics made it unavoidable. The Panama Canal happened because American strategic and commercial interests made it a national priority. The Musandam Canal would need a similar convergence, and right now, despite the tensions, despite the insurance premiums, despite the naval patrols, that convergence has not happened yet. Maybe it never will. The mountains are not getting smaller, the politics are not getting simpler. But I think the fact that serious engineers and serious strategists keep coming back to this idea tells us something real. The Strait of Hormuz is a vulnerability that the world has chosen to live with, not because there are no alternatives, but because the alternatives are harder than most people are willing to admit. And as long as that is true, the canal through Musandam will stay exactly where it has been for decades. On the drawing board, waiting for a moment that might never come. If you found this breakdown useful, the next video goes even deeper into how the world's energy choke points actually shaped modern geopolitics, and into which ones most people have never heard of. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it.